You don't invite your past to a reunion unless you're sure it stayed beneath you. The ballroom of Westbridge High's 15-year reunion shimmered under soft golden lights, the kind that made cheap wine look expensive and old memories feel dangerously close. Laughter echoed against glass walls as waiters in black vests moved between clusters of former classmates, their trays carrying flutes of champagne and stories that had aged better than most of the people telling them, and near the center of it all stood Ryan Foster, one hand casually tucked into his tailored navy suit, the other gripping a microphone he hadn't been asked to hold, his voice cutting through the room with the ease of someone who had always believed he deserved to be heard. "You guys remember Olivia Bennet?" he said, a smirk forming before the name even settled, and like a ripple, heads began to turn, some curious, some amused, some already anticipating the punchline, because Ryan had always been that guy, the one who turned people into stories and stories into entertainment, and then she appeared. Not dramatically, not with any intention of claiming attention. Olivia stepped in quietly from the side entrance, her heels soft against polished marble, her black dress simple, clean, the kind of elegance that didn't beg to be noticed but refused to be ignored. Her hair fell just past her shoulders, catching a hint of light as she paused for half a second, just long enough to take in the room, the voices, the eyes, and him. Ryan's smile widened when he saw her, not warm, not surprised, but satisfied, like a setup finally paying off. "There she is," he said, raising his glass slightly as if welcoming a guest of honor, though the tone carried none of it. "Olivia, come on, don't be shy. It's been what? 8 years. A few chuckles scattered across the room, people shifting closer, drawn by the familiar gravity of someone else's discomfort. Olivia walked forward, steady, composed, each step measured not out of hesitation but control. She stopped a few feet from him. Not too close. Not distant either, just enough space to breathe. Ryan tilted his head, eyes scanning her like he was trying to reconcile this version with the one he had filed away years ago. "Wow." He exhaled, dragging the word just enough to make it sting. "Still keeping things simple, I see." More laughter, softer this time, testing the boundary, waiting to see how far he'd go. He leaned slightly toward the mic again, lowering his voice just enough to feel intimate. "I mean, last I heard, you were working 2 jobs just to stay afloat, right? Guess some things don't change." The room didn't erupt, but it didn't defend her either, and that silence, that careful neutrality, was louder than any insult. Olivia didn't respond. Not with words, not with expression. Her fingers rested lightly against the stem of a glass someone had handed her without her noticing, her gaze steady, not on him, but through him, as if whatever version of Ryan Foster existed in her memory no longer occupied the same space as the man speaking. The pause stretched, just long enough to make a few people shift uncomfortably. Ryan's smile flickered, only for a fraction of a second, but it was there, the tiniest crack in confidence, before he recovered, chuckling into the mic as if filling the gap himself. "Hey, I'm just kidding, right? That's what reunions are for." But Olivia still said nothing. She simply lowered her glass, the base touching the table with a soft, deliberate click that somehow cut cleaner than his voice ever could, and in that moment, without raising her tone, without defending her past, without correcting a single word, she shifted something in the room, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable, because dignity, real dignity, didn't argue. It didn't rush to prove anything. It just stood there, calm, unshaken, and let the noise reveal itself for what it was. Ryan held his smile a second too long, the kind that began to feel rehearsed even to the people who wanted to believe it was natural, and Olivia could see it now, not as the charm she once trusted, but as something thinner, something that depended too much on the room agreeing with him, and the room was no longer fully on his side, not in a way it had been minutes ago. There was a hesitation in the air, a quiet recalibration, like everyone was subtly stepping back from a line they had almost crossed. Ryan cleared his throat, lifting his glass as if to reset the tone. "Well," he said, forcing a lighter note into his voice, "it is good to see you doing okay." The pause before the last word barely noticeable, but deliberate, and Olivia recognized it instantly. That careful choice of language that sounded polite while quietly lowering the bar, and years ago, she would have rushed to lift it, to prove that she was more than just okay, that she was doing well, that she was happy. But now, she felt no urgency, no pull to correct him, because the truth of her life no longer needed his acknowledgement to exist. She simply inclined her head slightly, a small gesture that neither agreed nor disagreed. And in that absence of reaction, Ryan lost another foothold. He shifted his weight, glancing briefly toward a group behind him as if searching for reinforcement. But no one stepped in, no one laughed loudly enough to carry him forward. And that silence pressed in just enough to make him speak again, faster this time. "You know, I always wondered how things turned out for you," he continued, his tone drifting back towards something more pointed. "After everything, I mean, it was not exactly easy back then." He let the sentence hang, inviting the past into the room like an uninvited guest. And for a moment, it almost worked, because memory has a way of pulling at the edges of even the strongest composure. But Olivia did not let it take shape. She did not revisit the small apartment with its flickering kitchen light, or the late nights waiting for explanations that never came. She did not return to the quiet morning when he walked out with a suitcase and left the door half open, as if even closure had been too much effort. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, in the present, grounded, untouched by the version of her life he was trying to revive for an audience. "It was not easy," she said softly, not denying it, not hiding it, just placing the truth where it belonged, without weight, without bitterness. And then she let the sentence end there, refusing to build on it, refusing to give it the drama he was hoping to shape. Ryan nodded quickly, seizing on the agreement as if it validated his narrative. "Right, exactly," he said, his voice picking up confidence again. "Not everyone gets a second chance like that." But the words landed differently now, because there was a faint edge of defensiveness beneath them, something that had not been there before, and a few people in the room noticed, their attention no longer drifting toward Olivia with curiosity, but toward Ryan with quiet scrutiny, as if they were beginning to understand that this was less about her and more about him needing to define her in a way that kept his own story intact. Olivia lifted her gaze slightly, not to challenge him, but to acknowledge the shift she could feel around them, the subtle change in posture, in breathing, in where people chose to look. And for the first time since she entered the room, she allowed herself the smallest hint of a smile, not directed at him, not shared with anyone, just there, brief and contained, like a private recognition of something already decided. Ryan saw it, and it unsettled him more than any argument would have, because it did not ask for his approval, it did not respond to his words, it existed entirely outside of his reach. And in that moment, without raising her voice, without revealing anything about the life she had built, Olivia made one thing quietly clear. The version of her he had come prepared to mock no longer existed, and whatever he had planned to prove tonight was beginning to dissolve before he could even name it. The music resumed, softer now, as if the room itself was trying to recover from a moment it did not fully understand, and Olivia stepped away from the center without asking permission, without waiting for the conversation to resolve, her movement unhurried, deliberate, as she crossed toward the edge of the ballroom where the light dimmed slightly and the noise thinned into something more manageable. She picked up a fresh glass of water from a passing tray, the condensation cool against her fingertips, grounding, familiar, and for the first time since she walked in, she allowed her gaze to drift, not searching for anyone, not expecting anything, just observing, the polished wood floor reflecting fragments of movement, the distant hum of conversations blending into a steady rhythm, and in that quiet distance from Ryan's voice, the present softened, giving space for something else to surface, not as a sharp memory, but as a series of small, unspoken moments that had once defined everything, a cramped kitchen with a single window that faced a brick wall, mornings that began before sunrise because she had two jobs waiting, one that paid just enough to keep the lights on, and another that barely covered groceries, the sound of a coffee machine sputtering to life at 5:30 in the morning, the smell of burnt toast because she never had time to wait for it to finish properly, and through all of it, a version of herself that kept going, not because she believed it would get better, but because stopping was not an option. She remembered the weight of exhaustion that sat behind her eyes like a constant shadow, the way her hands would ache from carrying trays, from typing late into the night, from holding onto a life that had quietly collapsed without warning, and she remembered the silence of that small apartment after Ryan left. Not dramatic, not loud, just an absence that stretched into every corner, where even the ticking of the wall clock felt too sharp, too present, as if reminding her that time was still moving forward whether she was ready or not. Olivia took a slow breath, bringing herself back, the glass lifting slightly as she took a sip, the cool water steadying her. Because those days no longer defined her. They belonged to a version of her that had learned how to endure without being seen, and that mattered. But it did not own her anymore. A faint sound of laughter pulled her attention briefly to the left, a group of former classmates exchanging stories that seemed easier now, lighter, untouched by the kind of weight she had carried. And she did not resent it. She simply observed it. The way someone who has walked through something different learns to see without comparison. Her reflection caught faintly in the glass panel beside her, not perfectly clear, just enough to outline her posture, her stillness, and she studied it for a moment, not critically, not searching for flaws, just recognizing this was not the woman who used to wait for validation, who used to measure her worth against someone else's approval. This was someone who had built something quieter, something that did not need to be announced to exist. Across the room, Ryan's voice rose again, trying to reclaim its place. But it sounded different from here, less commanding, more distant, like noise that had lost its center, and Olivia did not turn back immediately. She let it fade into the background, because whatever he was trying to prove no longer required her presence to hold together, and in that small, almost invisible choice, to step away, to not engage, to not be pulled back into a narrative that no longer belonged to her, she marked the beginning of something else, not a confrontation, not yet, but a quiet shift, the kind that happens long before anyone else notices, the kind that changes the direction of everything without making a sound. The glass remained cool in her hand, but Olivia no longer needed it to steady herself, because something inside her had already settled into place, something quieter than confidence and stronger than defiance, the kind of calm that comes after you have nothing left to prove. She set the glass down gently on a nearby table, aligning it with the edge without looking, a small habit she had developed over the years, a way of creating order in moments that once felt unpredictable. And as she straightened, her attention shifted not to the room, not to the voices that still carried fragments of Ryan's laughter, but to the memory of a different kind of silence, one that did not belong to the past she had just revisited, but to something more recent, something that had changed the rhythm of her days without asking for recognition. It had started without intention, without a plan, just a routine that slowly became something else. A small cafe on the corner of Maple and 3rd, the kind of place most people passed without noticing, where the sign flickered slightly at night, and the morning crowd rarely stayed longer than 10 minutes. She had taken the job because it was close, because it paid on time, because it did not ask questions she did not want to answer, and for a while, it was just that, a place to work, a place to move through hours that needed to be filled, until one morning just after 7, when the sky was still pale and the city had not fully woken up, he walked in not with presence, not with the kind of attention that turned heads, but with a quiet certainty that did not need to. He ordered coffee, nothing complicated, no small talk, his voice even, his posture relaxed, and when she handed him the cup, their interaction lasted no more than a few seconds, just long enough for a polite nod, the kind that usually meant nothing. But the next morning, he returned, same time, same order, same quiet acknowledgement, and then the day after that, and the day after that, until his presence became part of the rhythm she had built for herself. Not intrusive, not demanding, just consistent, like the sound of the door opening at exactly 7:12 every morning, like the way he always chose the same seat by the window, not to be seen but to observe, and for weeks, that was all it was, a pattern, a familiarity that did not ask for anything more, until one morning, when the lines stretched longer than usual and the machine faltered under the pressure, a small delay that would have once sent her into quiet panic. But before she could move to fix it, he stepped forward, Not crossing any boundary, not assuming, just offering. Take your time, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, and there was something in the way he said it, not as reassurance, not as sympathy, but as understanding, as if time itself was not something she needed to fight against, and she realized then how rare that felt, to be given space without being questioned, to be seen without being examined. She did not ask his name, he did not offer it, and somehow that made it easier because there was no past to explain, no expectation to meet, just a presence that existed without weight, and over time, in small, almost invisible ways, that presence became something she could rely on, not in a way that replaced what she had lost, but in a way that reminded her she was no longer standing alone. And now, standing at the edge of the ballroom, with the echo of Ryan's voice fading into something distant and irrelevant, Olivia understood that whatever he believed he still held over her had already been replaced by something he could not see, something he had never been part of, and in that realization, there was no need for her to return to the center of the room, no urgency to correct the story he was still trying to tell, because the life she had built since then was not waiting for his acknowledgement to become real. It already was. The memory did not linger for long because it did not need to. It had already done its work, and Olivia returned fully to the present with a quiet inhale, her shoulders settling naturally as the ambient noise of the ballroom came back into focus, the soft clinking of glasses, the low hum of conversations weaving in and out of each other, and somewhere behind her, Ryan's voice still trying to gather attention. But now it sounded thinner, like something stretched too far. She turned slightly, not toward him, but toward the entrance of the room, as if drawn by something she could not quite name, and for a moment, nothing happened, just the steady rhythm of people moving, laughing, pretending the evening was as simple as it appeared, and then the door opened again, not dramatically, not enough to stop the room, just a quiet shift in motion, a man stepping inside with the same unhurried pace she remembered, his presence neither loud nor hidden, simply certain, his coat draped over one arm, his posture relaxed, eyes scanning the room not to be seen but to find, and when his gaze landed on her, it did not change, it did not brighten or sharpen. It simply settled, as if he had expected her to be exactly where she was. Olivia did not move immediately, but something in her expression softened, almost imperceptibly, a warmth that had nothing to do with the room or the people in it, and everything to do with recognition. He crossed the floor without drawing attention, no one announcing him, no sudden shift in music or light, just quiet steps against polished wood, each one measured, deliberate, until he stood beside her, close enough that their presence aligned naturally, not forced, not staged. "You made it," he said, his voice low, steady. The same tone she had heard on quiet mornings when the world felt too fast, and he had never asked her to keep up. Olivia allowed herself a small breath of relief, not dramatic, not visible to anyone else, just enough to acknowledge that she was no longer standing alone in this space. "I did," she replied, her voice carrying that same calm she had held all evening, but now with something underneath it, something lighter. He nodded once, his attention briefly shifting past her toward the center of the room where Ryan stood, still talking, still trying to hold onto a narrative that was already slipping, but there was no reaction in his expression, no judgment, no curiosity, just a quiet awareness that did not need to be voiced. And then his focus returned to her. "Do you want to stay?" he asked, not assuming, not guiding, simply offering the choice as it was. Olivia glanced toward the crowd, the familiar faces that no longer felt close, the man who had once defined her now reduced to background noise, and she realized the answer had already formed before the question was asked. She shook her head slightly, a small movement, but certain. "Not for long," she said, and he did not question it, did not suggest otherwise. He simply inclined his head, accepting it without hesitation, as if her decision required no validation. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted again, not in the room, but in the balance of everything that had led to this moment, because for the first time since she stepped inside, Olivia was no longer responding to the past or enduring the present. She was choosing what came next, and as they stood there together, side by side, not making a scene, not drawing attention. The difference between what Ryan had tried to display and what she had quietly built became unmistakably clear, not through words, not through declarations, but through presence alone, steady, grounded, and entirely beyond his reach. Ryan noticed it before anyone else said a word, the subtle shift near the edge of the room, the way Olivia's posture changed, not defensive, not guarded, but settled, as if something had quietly aligned, and his gaze followed the direction of hers until it landed on the man standing beside her, and for the first time that evening, Ryan hesitated, not long enough for anyone to call it out, but enough for the rhythm of his confidence to break. He straightened instinctively, adjusting his jacket as if presentation could restore control, then lifted his voice again, louder this time, cutting through the room with a forced ease. "Looks like Olivia did not come alone after all," he said, drawing attention back toward them, and once again, the room turned, not with the same easy amusement as before, but with a quieter curiosity, people leaning slightly, trying to understand what had changed. Ryan stepped forward a few paces, the microphone now forgotten at his side, his focus fixed on the man beside her, measuring, assessing, searching for something familiar he could use. "And who might you be?" he asked, the question wrapped in politeness but edged with challenge. The man did not respond immediately, not out of hesitation, but because there was no urgency in him. He glanced briefly at Olivia, as if confirming something unspoken, and she gave the smallest nod, not permission, not instruction, just acknowledgement. And then he turned his attention back to Ryan, his expression calm, unreadable. "Sebastian," he said simply, his voice even, carrying just enough to be heard without trying to command the room. No title, no explanation, just a name placed where it belonged. Ryan let out a short breath through his nose, almost a laugh, as if expecting more and deciding to fill the space himself. "Sebastian," he repeated, nodding slowly. "Well, Sebastian, you picked an interesting night to show up." A few scattered glances moved between them, the tension not sharp, but present, like a line drawn lightly across the floor. And still, Sebastian did not engage beyond what was necessary, his posture unchanged, his attention steady, not on Ryan, but on Olivia, as if the rest of the room held no weight compared to her presence. And that, more than anything, unsettled Ryan, because it shifted the center of the moment away from him. Olivia remained still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her gaze neither confrontational nor withdrawn, just present. And in that presence, there was no trace of the woman Ryan had tried to summon earlier. No need to explain, no need to respond. Ryan took another step closer, his voice tightening slightly despite his effort to keep it light. "So tell me, Sebastian," he continued, "how do you know?" "Olivia?" The question hung in the air, simple on the surface, but layered with intent, searching for an angle, a weakness, something he could turn back into a story he controlled. Sebastian paused for a brief moment, not because he needed to think, but because he chose his words with care, and when he spoke, it was without emphasis, without performance. "She is my wife," he said, and the sentence settled into the room with a quiet finality that did not ask for reaction, but received it anyway. Not in laughter, not in shock, but in a collective stillness that spread outward like a ripple. Ryan's expression shifted, just slightly, the corners of his smile tightening before he could stop it, his eyes flicking between Olivia and Sebastian as if recalculating something that no longer added up, and around them, the room adjusted again, the balance tilting in a way no one had announced, but everyone could feel, because the narrative Ryan had been building all evening, piece by piece, had just lost its foundation in a single, unadorned sentence, and Olivia did not need to add anything to it. She did not confirm, did not elaborate. She simply stood there, beside the man who had just spoken, her silence no longer empty, but complete. The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled into the room with a quiet weight that shifted everything without raising a single voice, and for a moment, no one moved, not because they were frozen, but because they were recalibrating, adjusting to a reality that no longer matched the version of the story they had been following just seconds before. Ryan blinked once, then again, his grip tightening slightly around the glass in his hand as if anchoring himself to something solid, but the ground had already shifted beneath him. "Your wife," he repeated, the phrase slower now, less certain, as if saying it out loud might reveal a different meaning, but it did not. It remained exactly what it was: simple, direct, undeniable. His gaze moved back to Olivia, searching her face for contradiction, for hesitation, for anything that might soften the impact of what had just been said, but she offered none. She did not nod, did not smile, did not confirm, because she did not need to. The truth had already been placed in the room, and it stood on its own. Ryan forced a small laugh, but it came out thinner than before, missing the ease it once carried. "Well," he said, drawing out the word as he attempted to recover. "That is unexpected." He shifted his stance, glancing briefly around as if checking whether the room would support his reaction. But the energy had changed. People were no longer looking at Olivia with curiosity. They were looking at him with something quieter, something more observant, and he could feel it, even if he could not name it. Sebastian remained where he was, his posture unchanged, his attention not on the room, not on the reaction, but on Olivia, as if everything else existed at a distance, and that distance was what made it undeniable, because there was no performance in it, no attempt to prove anything, just presence. Steady and complete. Ryan cleared his throat again, his voice tightening, despite his effort to keep it level. "So what do you do, Sebastian?" he asked, the question carrying a different kind of weight now, not casual, not conversational, but searching, probing for something he could measure, something he could place above or below his own standing, something that would allow him to regain a sense of control. Sebastian paused briefly, not out of hesitation, but because the question itself did not hold much importance, and when he answered, his tone remained the same, even unhurried. "I work in investment," he said, nothing more, no elaboration, no list of achievements, just a statement that did not try to impress, and somehow that made it more unsettling because it gave Ryan nothing to push against, nothing to diminish, nothing to turn into a comparison he could win. A man near the back of the room shifted, leaning slightly toward another guest, whispering something that did not quite carry, but changed the expression on the listener's face, a flicker of recognition, of understanding, as if a missing piece had quietly fallen into place, and the ripple began, subtle at first, then spreading, not loud enough to interrupt the moment, but present enough to alter it. Ryan noticed it, the way attention was no longer centered where he wanted it to be, the way the room seemed to be moving around something he could not fully grasp, and for the first time that evening, his confidence did not return immediately. It hesitated, fractured, just enough to show. Olivia remained still, her expression calm, her posture unchanged, but there was something different now, not in what she showed, but in what no longer needed to be hidden, because the life she had built was no longer a quiet truth held privately. It had stepped into the same space as her past, not to confront it, not to compete with it, but simply to exist alongside it, undeniable in its own right, and in that quiet coexistence, the difference became clear to everyone watching, not through explanation, not through confrontation, but through contrast alone, one built on noise, on validation, on the need to be seen, and the other built in silence, in consistency, in something that did not ask for attention but held it anyway. And as the room adjusted once more, the shift completed itself without announcement, leaving Ryan standing in a moment he no longer controlled, and Olivia exactly where she needed to be, without having moved at all. The words did not echo. They did not need to. They settled into the room with a quiet weight that shifted everything without raising a single voice, and for a moment, no one moved, not because they were frozen, but because they were recalibrating, adjusting to a reality that no longer matched the version of the story they had been following just seconds before. Ryan blinked once, then again, his grip tightening slightly around the glass in his hand as if anchoring himself to something solid, but the ground had already shifted beneath him. "Your wife," he repeated, the phrase slower now, less certain, as if saying it out loud might reveal a different meaning, but it did not. It remained exactly what it was: simple, direct, undeniable. His gaze moved back to Olivia, searching her face for contradiction, for hesitation, for anything that might soften the impact of what had just been said, but she offered none. She did not nod, did not smile, did not confirm, because she did not need to. The truth had already been placed in the room and it stood on its own. Ryan forced a small laugh, but it came out thinner than before, missing the ease it once carried. "Well," he said, drawing out the word as he attempted to recover. "That is unexpected." He shifted his stance, glancing briefly around as if checking whether the room would support his reaction, but the energy had changed. People were no longer looking at Olivia with curiosity. They were looking at him with something quieter, something more observant, and he could feel it, even if he could not name it. Sebastian remained where he was, his posture unchanged, his attention not on the room, not on the reaction, but on Olivia, as if everything else existed at a distance, and that distance was what made it undeniable, because there was no performance in it, no attempt to prove anything, just presence, steady and complete. Ryan cleared his throat again, his voice tightening, despite his effort to keep it level. "So what do you do, Sebastian?" he asked, the question carrying a different kind of weight now, not casual, not conversational, but searching, probing for something he could measure, something he could place above or below his own standing, something that would allow him to regain a sense of control. Sebastian paused briefly, not out of hesitation, but because the question itself did not hold much importance, and when he answered, his tone remained the same, even unhurried. "I work in investment," he said, nothing more, no elaboration, no list of achievements, just a statement that did not try to impress, and somehow that made it more unsettling because it gave Ryan nothing to push against, nothing to diminish, nothing to turn into a comparison he could win. A man near the back of the room shifted, leaning slightly toward another guest, whispering something that did not quite carry, but changed the expression on the listener's face, a flicker of recognition, of understanding, as if a missing piece had quietly fallen into place, and the ripple began, subtle at first, then spreading, not loud enough to interrupt the moment, but present enough to alter it. Ryan noticed it, the way attention was no longer centered where he wanted it to be, the way the room seemed to be moving around something he could not fully grasp, and for the first time that evening, his confidence did not return immediately. It hesitated, fractured, just enough to show. Olivia remained still, her expression calm, her posture unchanged, but there was something different now. Not in what she showed, but in what no longer needed to be hidden, because the life she had built was no longer a quiet truth held privately. It had stepped into the same space as her past, not to confront it, not to compete with it, but simply to exist alongside it, undeniable in its own right, and in that quiet coexistence, the difference became clear to everyone watching, not through explanation, not through confrontation, but through contrast alone, one built on noise, on validation, on the need to be seen, and the other built in silence, in consistency, in something that did not ask for attention but held it anyway, and as the room adjusted once more, the shift completed itself without announcement, leaving Ryan standing in a moment he no longer controlled, and Olivia exactly where she needed to be, without having moved at all. No one spoke first, not because they did not have something to say, but because the moment no longer belonged to words, it belonged to realization, and realization has a way of quieting even the loudest rooms. Ryan shifted his weight again, but this time the movement felt less controlled, less deliberate, as if his body had not yet caught up with the change unfolding around him. He glanced down at his glass, then back up, searching for a version of the evening he could still hold on to, but it was gone, replaced by something he had not prepared for, something he could not reshape with another joke or another story. Olivia did not watch him struggle. She did not need to, because whatever answer he was looking for no longer involved her. She turned slightly toward Sebastian, her movement smooth, unhurried, and in that small turn, she made a decision that did not require explanation. He met her gaze immediately, not with a question, not with concern, but with quiet understanding, as if he had been waiting for that exact moment without needing to ask when it would come. "We should go," she said, her voice soft but certain, and it carried just enough to be heard by those closest, not as an announcement, but as a conclusion. Sebastian nodded once, no hesitation, no suggestion to stay longer, because staying had never been the point, and together, They began to move, not quickly, not as an escape, but with a calm purpose that did not look back, the sound of their steps blending into the floor beneath them, steady, aligned, and as they passed through the room, the conversations parted slightly, not in a dramatic way, just enough to make space, just enough for people to step aside without fully realizing why. Ryan watched them, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something quieter, something harder to name. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came, because there was nothing left that would land the way he intended, nothing that would return the room to the version he had built at the beginning of the night, and for the first time, he did not try to fill the silence, he simply stood in it, holding the remains of a moment that no longer belonged to him. Olivia did not slow down, did not turn back, the doors ahead of her already within reach, the soft glow of the hallway lights spilling into the ballroom. And as she stepped through, the air shifted, cooler, quieter, free from the weight she had walked into earlier. Sebastian walked beside her, not leading, not following, just there, his presence steady, unchanged, and for a brief second, as the door closed gently behind them, sealing off the noise, Olivia allowed herself a breath that felt different from all the others that night, not controlled, not measured, but natural, unguarded, like something she no longer had to hold back. Outside, the night stretched open, the distant hum of the city replacing the echoes of the room, and she paused for just a moment, not out of hesitation, but to take it in, the space, the quiet, the absence of anything she needed to prove. Sebastian glanced at her, a subtle question in his eyes, and she answered it without words, a small, genuine smile that did not belong to the past or to anyone watching, just to her. And then she stepped forward, continuing into the night without looking back, leaving behind not just the room, not just the people, but the version of herself that had once needed their acknowledgement to feel whole, because she had not come to reclaim anything, she had come to see clearly, and now that she had, there was nothing left to stay for. She did not win him back. She did not correct his story. She simply outgrew it, and in that quiet departure, without a single raised voice, she won something far greater. She won herself.